Go.
Hi everyone, I'm going to read an extract of the first chapter of Million Eyes. This chapter is set on August the 2nd, 1100, and it follows a charcoal burner called Perkis, who's trekking home through the New Forest with his horse, Samson, and he's having a little bit of a moan about the king, who is William II, and the taxes the king's been levying, which are getting heavier and heavier. And at one stage he wishes the king dead. And at that point, he hears footsteps in the woods. A fallen branch snapped. Perkis flinched. Now his gaze was drawn to the right, and a figure mostly obscured by trees, 15 to 20 feet away. "Walter, I thought you were a master at this," said a man with a smooth voice, edged with authority and a touch of annoyance. A pause. Then the same voice said, "So you're one of them then? One of King William's hunting parties?" Must have been. Stringent forest laws forbade the killing of deer or boar by anybody other than the king's hunting parties. It was punishable by death. But the king and his subjects were Norman. Normans spoke French. Perkis couldn't understand a word of it. This man had just spoken English. Samson had started to graze on what little grass was available where they'd stopped. Perkis moved closer to the man who had just spoken, hoping for a better look. He eventually caught the man's bottom half. His top half was still obscured in part by the leafy branches of an oak. He saw the fringe of a thin black cape, elegant blue hose, and polished boots, and could just about tell that his blue-sleeved arms were raised. Perkis moved again. Now he could see that the man was tall, broad-shouldered, and formidable. He caught one side of the man's round face, and saw why his arms were raised. His bow was nocked, an arrow ready to fly. He couldn't see the target, probably a deer. He looked in the arrow's direction and thought he saw a pair of antlers emerge from the shadow of a tree. No, just a tree branch, missing one side of its bark, pushed by a brief wind into the sun's glare. "I take it your name is not Walter Tyrrell?" Oh, the smooth voice wasn't coming from the man with the bow and arrow. There was someone else. But who? The trees were thick here. Perkis moved again. "No," said the man with the bow and arrow. Now Perkis saw the owner of the other voice. A short, rotund man with a yellow moustache, flushed cheeks, small eyes encircled by dark rings, and curly, yellow, bedraggled hair sticking out from underneath a red velvet hat trimmed with feathers. He was in a long, dark green tunic, with fancy-looking patterns stitched in golden thread, fastened at the waist with a belt encrusted with glistening jewels of different colours, and his thin legs were encased in hose that were the same deep shade of red as his hat. But that looked like... No, it couldn't be. The yellow-haired man said, "Then who—" "That doesn't matter," said Tyrrell, or whoever he was, his voice much deeper and harsher than the yellow-haired man's. "Just give me the book." "The book? What book?" The yellow-haired man seemed equally puzzled. "What book?" "Don't play games with me, your grace. This arrow is pointed straight at your heart." "Your grace?" Perkis swallowed. It was like forcing down a rock. He couldn't believe it, yet he knew it to be true. The regal clothes, the golden head, the red complexion that had earned him the nickname William Rufus. For some reason he was using the tongue of the common people, but there could be no doubt. This Walter Tyrrell was threatening to shoot the king. Perkis felt a tightening in his chest. Just 10 minutes ago he had silently wished the king dead. Could his treasonous thoughts have precipitated this? "What amusement," smirked the king. "A traitorous pretender accuses me of playing games." Tyrrell just glared down the shaft of his arrow. "Where is it?" "Safe," said the king, evidently knowing of this book all along. "Hidden. And if you think I'm ever going to tell you where, you may as well shoot me now." "Fine." Tyrrell pulled back his bowstring and released it with a twang. The arrow sliced through the air with a faint hiss and thudded into the king's chest. Perkis clamped his hand over his mouth to suppress a horrified gasp. The king thumped into a shallow bed of bracken. Perkis moved in a little closer, ducked behind a large gorse bush, and peeked over the top. The king clung to life, fingers clenched around the arrow in his chest, blood spilling over his fist and onto the bracken. Then he wheezed his last. His head drooped to one side and his gaze froze in death. Perkis shuddered. A small twig snapped beneath his foot. Tyrell reacted, twisting in Perkis's direction. Damn, he'd heard it. Perkis stooped low immediately, hopefully obscured by the bush. No. Did he see me? Perkis could still see the king's killer through gaps in the green spiny branches and egg yolk yellow blooms. Please, no. Tyrell walked forwards, heading in Perkis's direction. As he did, he took out a new arrow. Perkis stopped breathing, a knot lodged in his throat. He shut his eyes. Tyrell's boots crunched over fallen leaves and twigs, drawing closer and louder. A sharp sound split the air. Perkis's eyes sprang open. Tyrell had stopped. It was a bizarre sound, quite musical, and appeared to have saved Perkis from getting shot. Tyrell dug his hand inside his tunic, pulled something out. Now that he was distracted, Perkis moved back to a safer, more distant position, angled so he could still see what was going on through a gap in the trees. Tyrell was holding something, a flat, black, rectangular object. He tapped it with his finger. The music stopped. Tyrell lifted the object to his ear. What was he doing? Hello? Tyrell murmured. Me? Is he talking to me? The king is dead. Did it work? There was a silence. A moment later he continued. Then I'll have to continue searching for the book. Another pause. Then I'll have to lie low for a while, change my identity. I think the king's chief minister, Ranulph Flambard, might know. His sentence trailed off, unfinished. There was a much longer silence, and it was almost as if he was listening to the object at his ear. Was he mad? He certainly seemed it. He finally said, Are you ordering me to make another jump? After a pause, When? A further long silence was followed by, So I shouldn't stick around here, find out if Ranulph Flambard was the one who... Another unfinished sentence. What in the world was going on? Tyrell gave a sigh and muttered, Yes, ma'am, I'll take care of it. Then he lowered the black object from his ear, tapped the front of it again, and slipped it back inside his tunic. There must have been some holder or small bag that was sewn into the lining. As he withdrew his hand from the receptacle, something else came with it. Another strange object, small, cylindrical, white. He fumbled with it with both hands. There was a faint click. Perkis peered hard, saw an opening in the top of the object, and recognised that it was a kind of bottle or pot. And Tyrell had just removed the lid. Tyrell used one hand to tip the bottle into the other and gently shake it. A tiny object the colour of blood, possibly a stone or jewel, rolled out into his palm. He threw up his palm to his mouth and the stone was gone, swallowed. He replaced the lid on the bottle. Perkis took a breath. Now what? His question was answered instantly, as a bright and soundless light, white, hot and painful, seared into his eyes and made him jump back instinctively. For a moment he saw nothing but white. He shook his head. The whiteness dissolved steadily to blurry browns and greens, and, with a rub of the eyes, solidified to trees and vegetation. Tyrell was gone. He could not have walked or run away. Perkis would have heard his footsteps. He had, impossibly, disappeared into thin air. Witchcraft? Perkis waited a minute or so, then stepped forwards through the trees and came upon the body of William Rufus, the king he'd wished dead, and was now very much so. He stared at the body. The king's face was no longer its famous red, rather a spectral grey, since most of his blood had now leaked into the forest floor from the puncture in his chest. He couldn't just leave him there. He returned to Sampson, still happily grazing. He drew the horse and cart towards the body, unloaded the wood, which he would hopefully collect tomorrow, and lifted the body into the back of the cart. He resumed his journey to Canterton, where he lived, to tell Cecilia, his wife, that he would be taking the body to Winchester, the capital. It was the least he could do. Would he tell Cecilia, or anyone for that matter, what he had seen? No, he decided. He didn't see anything. Some things were best left alone. So that's your lot. If you want to hear some more, you know what you have to do.